The NFL has a potentially robust wide receiver trade market right now that could help the Chicago Bears overcome a relative lack of depth in the free agent market.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit the subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, hopefully every day. Today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On the show today, we look at the wide receiver trade market in particular. We've already seen a couple of blockbuster wide receiver trades that kind of shook things up and maybe inflated some trade prices, but there's all of a sudden a number of other guys potentially available, some more strongly rumored, some more like speculated to be available. Some of the previous trades, the Bears were at least reportedly involved in. So we'll look at some of the different options and the state of the wide receiver trade market right now, as well as the wide receiver free agency market to kind of find that missing piece for the Bears that have already signed a couple of players, but still feels like they need something else, right? Darnell Mooney, Byron, Pringle, Equanimeous, St. Brown, especially Mooney. I mean, not all created equal here, but like are options, right? Those are nice pieces to have in a wide receiving core, but like collectively where they stand right now, this does not seem like a strong enough group of pass catchers for Justin Fields. Of course, the NFL draft has some real depth there, but at the same time, you don't like to go into the draft feeling like you have to take a wide receiver with one of your early draft picks. Because if you took a wide receiver in the 5th round, right, you can't count on that 5th rounder to be Darnell Mooney. They're probably going to slot in as your number 4 wide receiver, so you would be relying on Mooney, Pringle, and St. Brown to be a top 3 group, and that's just not really a good enough wide receiving core for Justin Fields right now. And unfortunately, you look around the free agency pool right now, and it wasn't a super deep group to begin with in terms of like options that fit exactly what the Chicago Bears are looking for. And some of the guys that were available ended up going for some fairly significant price tags that were a little bit more out of the Bears' range. But like right now, at the top, of course, you have, like Odell Beckham Jr., who was torn ACL or torn Achilles, or was it ACL or Achilles? I don't remember. But regardless, he's going to miss some time and is not really in the Bears' range there. Anyway, we've talked before, like Jarvis Landry's probably one of the other top options here. And, we haven't heard the Bears really specifically connected to him at all. But, like, he wouldn't be a terrible fit by any means. He'd be a welcomed addition. But price is one thing, and also, like, opportunity for him if you'd rather go somewhere a little bit more immediately competing for a Super Bowl than what Chicago is. I mean, we'll kind of call him maybe, but like from there, it goes downhill fast, right? You have like Will Fuller as a deep speed threat, but not like a true number 1 guy. Sammy Watkins in a similar type of vein. They can both be productive in the right offenses, but is the rest, do they fill out this wide receiving core in a way that makes you feel super great about it? I mean, I think they'd be better than what the Bears have at a lot of those other spots right now, but like they're not necessarily hammering it home. I mean, they're good, right? They'd be nice to have, but they're not solving it. And not all these options, even on the trade market, are going to solve wide receivers. So there are possibilities there. Otherwise, it's like, Keelan Cole from the Jaguars. He's been, a somewhat decent receiver sometimes in his career. Allen Hurns was just released from the Miami Dolphins, who he sat out 2020, he opted out for COVID, and then missed all of last season on injured reserve. So he hasn't really played in a game since 2019, but he's been a 1,000-yard receiver before for the Jaguars. Or, like Adam Humphries, he was once he almost had 1,000 yards with the Buccaneers that one year, I think, but has been a pretty productive role player type wide receiver, but it's just not a great overall currently wide receiver class. And even before that, right? We don't have to go through it, but Christian Kirk gets overpaid. Robinson ends up being more or less affordable, but it kind of felt like that was going to be done either way. Marquez Valdez-Scantling kind of gets more than you thought he would. Russell Gage gets quite a bit more than we thought he might have. I mean, even DJ Chark gets $10 million on a one-year deal from the Lions. It ended up being kind of a pricey wide receiver market, and kind of left the Bears saying, well, we're not going to overpay for, then I don't want to say mediocre wide receivers, but not overpay for like not true number one type wide receivers. And so that's why I find myself turning to the trade market here and looking around at like what wide receivers other teams might want to get rid of. But of course, you might see inflated demands when Devontae Adams is traded for a first and a second round pick. And, Tyreek Hill gets the big haul for the Chiefs from the Miami Dolphins, and both of them get big contracts to make them the highest paid receivers in football. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, these top receivers are getting these top offers, these top trades and top contracts for them. So does that kind of raise everybody else up? If that sets the top, then everything is sort of a fall down from there. And so, at least before all that, Amari Cooper was traded to the Browns for it was a 5th round pick for him. And even Robert Woods goes from the Rams to the Titans for a 5th round pick. The Bears were reportedly in on that, or were pursuing or interested in trading for Robert Woods from the Los Angeles Rams, ends up going to the Titans instead. And like we've kind of said on the podcast before, it's not as simple as just saying, well, why didn't the Bears offer a 5th round pick? Because there are always other factors there. Maybe Robert didn't want to go there. Maybe the Rams wanted to respect Robert's wishes. Maybe they wanted to send him to the AFC. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why that deal maybe didn't end up happening for the Bears and all the other teams that were interested in Robert Woods. Amari Cooper also had the fairly large cap hit, but that salary, based on these other wide receiver contracts and also the other trade compensation, ends up looking like a pretty good deal, all things considered, relatively speaking, for Amari Cooper there. But it does feel like there's still more wide receiver trades to happen here. And there's no reason the Bears can't at least be kicking the tires on a few of these options. I think Bears fans have set their sights pretty high, and those might be a little bit out of reach. But, we'll talk about DK Metcalf and why that probably won't happen, but Tyler Lockett's in that conversation, but maybe more like a Devontae Parker, Brandon Cooks, or some of the lesser options that could still give the Bears some better value than they might find in the free agent market. Next on Locked On Bears. Today's podcast is brought to you by the makers of the world's best tasting protein bars, Built Bars, because Built Bars taste better than any other protein bar product out there on the market. Trust me, I've tried quite a variety of them in my day. I like a good protein bar to give me a little extra protein after I go to the gym or if I just need a snack during the day. But the nice thing about Built Bars is, yes, they give me all the nutrients I want. They're low sugar, low calories, high fiber, high protein, but they taste like candy bars. They really are delicious. They're soft. They're easy to chew. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. So it satisfies my sweet tooth without me feeling any of that guilt, and certainly any of that extra sugar crash or any of that crap that you get from eating actual candy. Built Bar gives you that flavor, but with the actual nutrients of being good for you. I'm telling you, you got to try them for yourself. Head on over to built.com, enter in our promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. We've seen plenty of Chicago Bears fans want to see the team trade for, say, DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks, or even Tyler Lockett, right? The rumors, I don't know, call it rumors, call it reporting, call it speculation, whatever it has been from Seattle after the Russell Wilson trade is sort of like, well, Seahawks aren't going to compete for the Super Bowl with Drew Lock right now. So given the type of compensation that the Packers got for Devontae Adams or the Chiefs got for Tyreek Hill, why not trade DK Metcalf and or Tyler Lockett, get a nice trade haul in return, use those picks and or players to help this rebuild process go along, right? I would think DK Metcalf would be the one that would get even more trade compensation because not only is he younger, but I mean, he's the freak athlete, right? I mean, he's 6'4" and runs a 4.40. I mean, he is the definition of big, fast, and strong. He's one of these like prototypical future NFL dominating type wide receivers that can win up and down the field and be that difference maker in your offense. And he's 2 years into his career, right? He's just going to keep getting better and better as he gets more and more experience. If you can, give him a real quarterback that's not Drew Lock, because that might impact his production a little bit. So like he's the young one on a rookie contract, we should mention too. So he's going to be cheap for now. He's going to be due a really big contract extension in a couple of years. You're going to have to pay, but if he's producing like a really good wide receiver, you have no problem paying him top wide receiver money. So like I would imagine Metcalf is going to demand or can really command a greater trade compensation compared to like Tyler Lockett, who will turn 30 during the season, I think. And I mean, he's not that much more expensive. I mean, he's got a $10 million cap hit this year. Is not bad. It's a really great deal actually for the production that you've gotten from Tyler Lockett. I mean, he's been a 1,000-yard receiver pretty much every year in his career and has actually outproduced DK Metcalf in that offense, in part because Lockett, I think, was more Russell Wilson's favorite receiver. They just had more time together and built more of that chemistry. But like $10 million cap hit this year, 16 the following year, then $24 million from there, right? The price starts to climb back up into these wide receiver rates. But again, he doesn't have the elite size to go with the speed and the production that DK Metcalf has, 5'10", 180, right? We don't need to, it is not a criticism of Tyler Lockett. It's just saying that like he's a little older and more expensive, even if he's just as productive and not as much of a physical freak. So presumably, if I'm the Seahawks, I'd be more tempted to trade Lockett because he's older, but Metcalf would command a bigger trade compensation. And regardless for both of them, it would seem like it would take, given what Adams and Hill got, if you sort of bring Metcalf and Lockett down a half step from them, not being like true, like people call Devontae Adams the best wide receiver in football, and Tyreek Hill might be number 2, right? I mean, we're talking, and like we're like Metcalf and Lockett are more like top 10 receivers. You bring it down a step, you're still getting at least a first-round pick for either of those guys, plus probably some more. And the Chicago Bears aren't necessarily, they don't have a first-round pick this year. And so are you trading next year's first-round pick for those receivers? I mean, you're not really trying to win the Super Bowl right away this season, right? We've talked about they need to build up around Justin Fields and develop this team for a season, and then kind of next year and beyond, it seems to be the plan for them to hit that window a little bit more. So it's like if you're trading a future first-round pick to get a player for you now, that doesn't seem to mesh as much with the long-term goals. Or like, do you package both second-round picks this year for them, and maybe you throw in a future pick? Or I mean, I don't know what the demands would be, but then like you could really use both of those second-round picks this year to build that foundation, right? You could also really use Tyler Lockett. So like I do get both sides, but it's kind of tough, and it feels more like I don't want to call it a pipe dream per se, but not as realistic given what the trade demands would be, right? It would be fun to have them here, but it might be more draft compensation than the Bears want to give up. But as you tone down the draft compensation you're willing to give up, you're also toning down the quality of receiver you're going to get in return. But I'm interested in Devontae Parker from the Dolphins, potentially as more of a middle ground here, because to me, he's not going to command nearly the type of compensation, it didn't seem like he should, that Metcalf or Lockett will. But he has been a 1,200-yard receiver before in his career. He's not dirt cheap, but he's affordable. I think he's got a $9 million cap hit, and I think you get 2 years of him before he's going to be a free agent again. He's got good size, 6'3", 220, moves pretty well. He's 29 years old. He's not old, he's not super, super young either, but his production has been down the last couple of seasons, and that can be what helps him end up being a cheaper option in terms of trade compensation. I mean, he had 515 yards this past season. I think he was injured in some of that. The year before, just under 800, and then before that was his 1,200-yard season. So, he's not like this bona fide 1,000-yard every year type receiver, but he does have that capability in him and would be, I don't want to say he's better than Darnell Mooney, but he'd be better than the other wide receivers the Bears have brought in this offseason. That's for sure. It could really be that more true type of running mate for Mooney, and then Pringle and St. Brown could fall into more like complementary roles that would seem to fit them better than like having to make them more premier pass catching options in this offense with Mooney that might be asking a little bit much for them or from them given what they've done up to this point in their careers. It's hard to get a sense of what Parker would command in a trade, but it just seems like it shouldn't take a first-round pick to get him. I mean, he was a first-round pick himself, but it just seems like if Amari Cooper, who was much more expensive, and that was a big part of it, but if Amari Cooper and Robert Woods both go for fifths, and then Tyreek Hill and Adams, of course, go for first pluses, somewhere in the middle seems like where Devontae Parker should go. But I don't have a great sense of that. Like, one of your second-round picks, but then it feels like you traded Khalil Mack for Devontae Parker, and that doesn't feel like a super great exchange. But I don't know. It's sort of applying different needs at different spots. I'm not sure what the value might be there. I'd certainly go for as low as you possibly can. And a second feels a little bit rich for me, given his production in recent seasons, right? He's not going to plug in and be an instant 1,200-yard receiver. You still need to have a good offense and everything else around him, but it does seem like an option there that's in this middle ground of like, no, you're not going to get DK Metcalf, but it's better than, trading a conditional 7th-round pick for Joe Blow on some other team, and it's like, yeah, that's good to have somebody else in here, but he's not really that much of a difference maker. Parker is like, he's not fully proven to be like a bona fide weapon, but like he's proven enough and like good enough and would add some real potential missing value for this team. The other name I would throw out there that, again, I don't think is probably going to happen given how his career trajectory has gone, but Brandon Cooks from the Texans, again, 28 years old, 1,000-yard, pretty much a perennial 1,000-yard receiver. Somehow he had 1,000 yards in the Texans offense last year. Like without Deshaun Watson, with Tyrod Taylor and Davis Webb as their quarterback, he had 1,000 yards last year. I mean, I was surprised when I went back and looked at that. And he's been traded twice in his career up to this point. It was a first-round pick to the Rams when he went there from the Patriots, and then when he was traded to the Texans, I think it was him and a 4th-round pick in exchange for a second. Now he's a couple years beyond that, and so I don't know what exactly his market would be because he's going to be a free agent next year. So you'd be trading for one guaranteed year, not guaranteed financially, but like guaranteed, like you would have him for 1 year for sure on a $16 million cap hit too, which the Bears don't have that much cap. So I think they've got like $18 million or whatever in cap space left. So like you're going to have to do some finagling either way with some of these significant wide receiver cap hits. But Cooks is in more of that category, right? Of like, he's very good, but he's not Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf level of compensation, but presumably would take more than like Robert Woods did. Or, I mean, maybe not given he's an expiring contract, but that's sort of, I kind of like those guys in that, more of that range of like, you can feel pretty good about them without having to sell the farm to get them. Maybe they're both wide receivers that want to go somewhere a little bit more ready to win, but there's some other receiver options that aren't as sexy, aren't as exciting, but have some upside there and could be relatively cheap trade compensation and bring them in Chicago and feel like they're maybe better and cheaper than some of the free agent options at wide receiver. We'll look at some guys across the league that have been reported to be available that maybe the Bears should at least kick the tires on and see what the price might be next on Locked On Bears. I want to tell you guys about a new sponsor we have here in the Locked On Bears podcast, a partner that has a product that I've been using every single day ever since they joined up with us. It's called Athletic Greens, and it's basically like a multivitamin supplement, but it's like in a powder. You dump a scoop of it in like 8 ounces of water, and it has everything. I mean, vitamins A through Z, and calcium and magnesium and zinc and all the things that boost your immune system, and they've got a lot of probiotics in there too. And that's what I've liked the most about them, right? Like, I like to take a multivitamin every day, or I would take a multivitamin every day, but I've been taking Athletic Greens instead, and like, it's good for you, and you feel good, and it gets you some of those vitamins that I'm just not getting in my daily nutrition. But what I like about Athletic Greens in particular is I found it has helped me with acid reflux that I get, especially when I eat too much, you kind of get that like heartburn type feeling. This has helped calm that down. It hasn't eliminated the problem. No, it's not a magic cure, but it has, for me, given me more like durability for that I can withstand more acidic foods without getting as nearly as strong a reaction. Almost like what I would get from, an over-the-counter type of anti-acid pill, right? It's giving me some of that same sort of gut strengthening effect. And I've really enjoyed that as sort of a side effect of surprise of like just started taking it and thought I'd get the multivitamin effect, but also getting some of that probiotics has been really great for me. And so it's time for you to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with what's really convenient daily nutrition from Athletic Greens. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. I think the Bears can still find some really good value on the on the wide receiver trade market without giving up a bunch of premium picks and still getting a player that you can feel like adds something to this wide receiving core and doesn't just slot in at the bottom as another guy, right? These are not going to be 1,000-yard number one receiver type players, but there's a handful of them here that's like, okay, I could get behind that, or I could kind of get behind that, or maybe you got to rework something here, or you hope for a little more potential there. But like, there's some options here that stand out to me as like names that we've seen either reported or rumored or speculated to be available via trade. And I haven't seen the Chicago Bears like specifically in on a ton of these. Like, it's not like they've been reportedly linked to any or all of these guys by any means, but it's just like, they're available. The Bears have a need. Let's make the link ourselves and say, hey, maybe the Bears should be kicking the tires on a guy like Laviska Shenault from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think he's 2 years into his career. He was a second-round pick for them. He's had about 600 yards each and every season. For whatever reason, the Jaguars, they went out and signed Zay Jones and Christian Kirk and have been kind of overhauling things there. He wasn't brought in by that regime, and maybe the rumor is that they've been willing to trade him or willing to part ways with him or open to trading him or whatever it might be, right? He's a 600-yard receiver in the Jaguars offense. Not going to come to Chicago and be a number one, but like, he's pretty good. And presumably, as a second-round pick who's getting 600 yards a year, he's not going to take a second-round pick to trade for him, right? If Amari Cooper and Robert Woods are going for fifths, Laviska Shenault shouldn't go for a ton, right? Comparatively here, yes, he's on a rookie contract. He'll be cheaper, more affordable. It's part of the Cooper thing. It's part of the Woods thing, yes. But like, he's the Jaguars' number 2 or 3 receiver. He's not going to command major draft pick compensation. So like, absolutely, sign me up for a recent young second-round pick on a rookie contract. That's worth, to me, taking a flyer on whatever day 3 draft pick I would have to send to the Jacksonville Jaguars. The other name that's come up as a potentially bigger, productive type guy is Chase Claypool. Boy, I mix both. I can't say that one 5 times fast. Chase Claypool from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Another one of these second-round pick a couple of years ago. He's 23 years old. He's had 800 yards each of his first 2 seasons. He's 6'4", like 230. I mean, he's big, downfield receiver. It would be great to have Chase Claypool in Chicago. I mean, supposedly there have been some kind of like immaturity concerns or like, on-field situational awareness, like, between the ears, Anthony Miller type stuff with him. But he's, unlike Anthony Miller, he's produced 800 yards each of the last 2 seasons. And of course, like, the Steelers have had their own stuff going on with Ben Roethlisberger now retiring, and he's been kind of an ineffective quarterback at a lot of this time too. But they've had other receivers, and for whatever reason, Pittsburgh might just be ready to kind of move on and turn a new page there. Absolutely. Again, sign me up for an 800-yard receiver who's 23 years old for whatever, is it going to take a day 3 draft pick? Maybe a little bit earlier than Laviska Shenault, given his production. But, like, I can't imagine it would take a ton, presumably, to get Chase Claypool. I cannot say his name. Chase Claypool. It's gonna kill me every single time I try and say it on the podcast. But, like, I mean, obviously, you'd kind of like to see out the whatever immaturity or on-field concerns or whatever might be with him. But, like, seems like an option there that's worth at least sort of exploring and kicking the tires on as better value than any free agent you could go out and sign. Again, rookie contract, young, productive receiver with size. Absolutely. Less cheap, less young, but receiver with size that's been in the trade market. This one would take some finagling here for the Bears. But Kenny Golladay from the Giants has been kind of floated out there. He was their big free agent signing last offseason, you may remember. But, like, terrible year with a terrible Giants team. He had like 500 yards and 0 touchdowns. But he's been a 1,000-yard receiver with the Lions a couple times. He's 6'4". He's built like that number. He kind of plays like a number one type receiver, isn't necessarily like bona fide proven there. But the real challenge, $21 million cap hit this year. Big contract. The Giants paid up and backloaded it. So like whoever trades for him is going to have a massive cap hit. And I don't know if you can keep restructuring that, but if anything, you'd kind of like him to have a pay cut. And I don't know that I want to take on, like I would have much rather taken on Amari Cooper at $20 million than Kenny Golladay at 21. So like the only way I'm trading for Kenny Golladay is if I can somehow bring that salary number down like permanently, not just like pushing it in the future, but like pay cut level, like, hey, you're overpaid. We're not going to trade for you unless you take less money, which is kind of a crappy thing to ask a wide receiver to do, and they don't always typically want to do that. So like Galladay's a little bit more out there, but what about the other Giants receiver, Darius Slayton? Kind of, when they signed Golladay, Slayton kind of fell out. They had Evan Ingram, they had Golladay, they had all the pieces in that offense, and Slayton kind of fell out. But like he'd been a 750, almost 800-yard receiver earlier in his career. He's 25 years old. He's 6'1", 190. He's been effective for them, but production has kind of dropped down. I think he was like 340-ish yards last season, and also he's had a lot of drop passes, which is part of why he's fallen out of favor there. And like, yes, drop passes, not great, but like day 3 draft pick for a guy who's had 750 yards in a season and still has some of that potential in there, 25 years old on a rookie contract, sign me up. Again, he's expiring. This will be his last season, so I'm not going to trade a very premium day 3 pick for him, but again, better than some of the other options on the Bears, and I would like him to be that next piece in there, with Mooney and St. Brown and Pringle, that maybe out of the 3 of those additions, that one of them can be better than they've been earlier in their career. I mean, it just seems like you got to do something, and with the free agent market as light as it is right now, it's a lot of old receivers is what it is, and then guys that are just not super all that proven. I'd rather trade a draft pick for a player that's already been recently drafted, that all those guys I mentioned except for Golladay are 25 and younger. So I mean, there's some real options there. I mean, I'd even throw Andy Isabella from the Cardinals in there. He's had almost zero production in his NFL career, but he was a second-round pick. He's a 5'9" slot receiver exclusively. He's short slot, but like he was a great route runner in college, and we fell in love with him in that NFL draft process. Was he at the Senior Bowl too, if I remember correctly? And just, dude, in college knew how to get open, and like people loved Andy Isabella. I really liked Andy Isabella, but like Cardinals wide receiver depth chart with DeAndre Hopkins and Christian Kirk before, and AJ Green they'd signed. I mean, they've had wide receivers for days, and Isabella just never had a role there. It didn't seem like the problem was that he wasn't good enough. It was that they just had so many better receivers that he was always kind of on the bench, and they've given him permission to seek a trade. He's 25, right? Absolutely, like he would not come in and be like a proven product by any means, but I really like the potential there, and it would be a great value if you could get him for a 6th or 7th round pick or whatever, to trade a 6th or 7th round pick for a former 2nd round pick that hasn't really tapped into that potential yet. Again, finding value that's cheap on other teams that have much more likely, or I would much rather like to try and hit that 6th round pick on Andy Isabella, who I've seen before as a 2nd round talent, than whatever 6th round pick you might pick in the upcoming NFL draft. So surprising number of names there, right? I mean, I think we went through 4 and then 9 receivers on other teams right now, some more realistic than others that are all rumored or reported to be available, and some of the options I like better than some of the other free agent options. So I hope, I'm sure Ryan Poles is at least aware of all those and is kicking the tires on him, but I'd like to see the Bears get in on that trade market a little bit, or at least get some kind of more concrete reporting that, hey, they actually are going after X, Y, or Z player, or even if the player's traded somewhere else, to say, hey, the Bears were in on it, the same way they were for Robert Woods. So you can feel like they're making some pushes there and trying to turn over every stone and all that good stuff. Whatever the Bears end up doing at wide receiver, you can be sure we'll break it all down for you 5 days a week right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. As free agency slows down and winds down, and as we get closer to the NFL draft, we will be turning more of our attention there. We'll go through some mock drafts. We'll get to know all the different prospects you need to know for the Bears in the 2nd round at wide receiver, cornerback, all the offensive line, all the positions of need. We will be on top of that. So I hope you'll keep tuning in. I hope you'll keep making Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day. And I hope as a result that the Locked On Bears podcast makes it that much easier for you to bear down.